You thought healing would feel like light pouring in. Instead, it feels like your world is falling apart from the inside. The life you built, crumbling. The identity you crafted, dissolving. The person you thought you were, vanishing. But what if this collapse is stage one of becoming whole again? What if the chaos you're experiencing isn't a sign you're broken, but a sign you're finally breaking free from everything that was never really you? What if everything you've been taught about healing is backwards? They don't tell you this part. The part where your life still looks the same. But inside, something has cracked. You smile. You work. You reply, "I'm fine." But underneath it all, there's a silence that won't leave you alone. You're falling into a state that cannot be named. Not sad, but empty. Not hurt, but soulless. And you think you're wrong for feeling this way. But actually, it is the first sign of transformation. This isn't laziness. It's not dysfunction. It's your persona starting to dissolve. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beneath all the masks you've worn. Your persona is that carefully constructed identity you've built to navigate the world. The version of yourself that knows how to succeed, how to be liked, how to fit in. But Jung understood something profound. This constructed self eventually becomes a prison. And when it starts to crack, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like falling. The shadow doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to unmask you. Jung said the shadow contains everything we've rejected about ourselves. Not just the dark parts, but often our deepest truths, our authentic emotions, our real desires. Meeting your shadow isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about becoming a real version of yourself. And that process, it has stages no one prepares you for. Stage 1. The internal dissonance. Stage 1 hits you like this. Everything seems fine, but nothing feels real. The music you once loved now feels flat, like you're hearing it through water. The goals that excited you 6 months ago now feel heavy, meaningless, like carrying stones up a mountain for no reason. The conversations you have feel scripted, hollow, like you're reading lines from a play you don't remember auditioning for. You go through the motions of your life, but it's like watching someone else live it. You catch yourself in meetings, realizing you've been nodding and responding, but you have no idea what you just said. You're present, but not present. Functioning, but not alive. You don't know who you are anymore, but you know with absolute certainty that you're not this. Sarah, a 29-year-old marketing manager from Chicago, described it perfectly. "I had everything I thought I wanted. The job with the good salary, the apartment in the trendy neighborhood, the relationship. That looked perfect on social media. But I felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life," she continued. "I'd wake up in the morning and feel this weight in my chest. Not depression exactly, but like emptiness. Like I was a character in a movie I didn't want to be in anymore. I'd post pictures of my avocado toast and my morning latte, and people would comment about how lucky I was, how together I had it all. But inside, I felt like I was disappearing. This internal dissonance is what Jung called the tension between your ego, your conscious sense of self, the I you present to the world, and your shadow. Everything you've pushed away, denied, or forgotten to maintain that identity. Your rational mind says everything is fine. You have all the markers of success, all the things you're supposed to want. But your emotional body, your soul, your deeper knowing, it knows something is deeply wrong. It's like living in a house that looks beautiful from the outside, but the foundation is slowly cracking. You can feel the instability, but you can't see it, and everyone else keeps complimenting the paint job. This isn't a breakdown. It's the soul signaling that the mask is cracked, that the life you've built doesn't match the person you actually are. The question Jung would ask: what part of yourself have you been abandoning to maintain this life? What aspects of your authentic nature have you sacrificed on the altar of acceptability? Pause here, take a breath, feel into your body. Is this what you've been carrying all along? This sense that something is off, even when everything looks right? The dissonance you feel isn't evidence that you're ungrateful or broken. It's evidence that your soul is still alive, still fighting for expression beneath the layers of conditioning. Stage 2, emotional whiplash. Then comes Stage 2, emotional whiplash. You cry over a childhood memory that surfaces out of nowhere. Maybe the time your father missed your school play, or the way your mother looked at you when you gained weight in middle school. Then, an hour later, you feel nothing, completely numb. Then suddenly you're furious at your partner for leaving dishes in the sink, and the anger feels disproportionate, volcanic, like it's coming from somewhere much deeper than dirty dishes. Your emotions don't match your circumstances anymore. One moment you're sobbing in your car, in the grocery store parking lot, because you saw an elderly man shopping alone, and it reminded you of mortality and loneliness and the fragility of human connection. The next moment, you're completely detached, watching your co-workers debate project deadlines, like they're discussing the weather on Mars. People around you start walking on eggshells. Are you okay? Becomes the question you dread most, because you don't know how to answer it. How do you explain that you're not okay, but you're not okay either? How do you say that you're feeling everything and nothing at the same time? Marcus, a 32-year-old lawyer from Portland, put it this way: I'd be in a partner meeting talking about billable hours, and suddenly I'd be fighting back tears. Not because anything sad happened, but because the fluorescent lights and the corporate speak and the pretending to care about things I didn't care about. It all felt so absurd, so meaningless. Then I'd go home, and my girlfriend would want to talk about our weekend plans, and I'd feel this rage bubble up. Not at her, but at everything. At having to perform interest in things that felt trivial, when I was questioning the entire foundation of my existence. What's happening here is that your emotional system is finally processing what you've been storing for years. Jung called this emotional material the personal unconscious, a reservoir of feelings, memories, and experiences you've suppressed, denied, or pushed aside to function in daily life. When the shadow begins to emerge, it doesn't come alone. It brings decades of unfelt feelings with it. The anger you never expressed when your controlling mother criticized your choices, the grief you pushed down when your dreams didn't work out the way you planned, the fear you masked with productivity and achievement and staying busy, the sadness you couldn't afford to feel when you were trying to hold everything together. Your nervous system is finally processing the backlog. It's like your emotional hard drive has been full for years, and now it's finally clearing space by bringing everything to the surface. This isn't emotional instability, it's emotional honesty. Your psyche is no longer willing to stuff feelings into the basement of your consciousness. The question becomes, instead of judging these emotions or trying to make them go away, what if you listened to what they're trying to tell you? Stage 3. The collapse of the false self. Stage 3 is when you can't keep performing anymore. You forget how to small talk. Standing in line at coffee shops, you can't bring yourself to comment on the weather or ask about weekend plans. The words feel foreign in your mouth, like speaking a language you used to be fluent in, but have somehow forgotten. You avoid the mirror, Not because you don't like how you look, but because you can't recognize who's looking back. The person staring at you feels like a stranger wearing your face. Social gatherings feel like wearing a costume that no longer fits. You show up to birthday parties and work events and family dinners, and you can feel yourself trying to access the version of yourself that knew how to do this. The person who could laugh at jokes that weren't funny, ask questions they didn't care about the answers to, perform interest in conversations that felt hollow. But that person, they're not available anymore. Emma, a 28-year-old graphic designer from Austin, described it like this: "I went to my college, friend's wedding, and I spent the entire reception feeling like an alien. Everyone was dancing and taking selfies and talking about their jobs and their relationships. And I kept thinking, is this what happiness looks like? Is this what I'm supposed to want?" I felt like I was watching human behavior from the outside, like an anthropologist studying a culture I didn't understand, she continued. The worst part was that 6 months earlier, I would have been right there with them. I would have been the one organizing the group photos and posting Instagram stories about how amazing it was to celebrate love. But sitting there in my dress that cost too much money, watching everyone perform joy, I felt like I was suffocating. Not because I was sad, but because I couldn't access the part of myself that knew how to pretend anymore. The mask you've worn so perfectly for so long, it's crumbling. And here's what terrifies most people about this stage. You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming someone you've always been, but forgot how to be. Jung understood this as the death of the false self, the carefully constructed identity built on external expectations, family conditioning, societal demands, and the desperate need to be accepted and loved. This false self isn't malicious. It was created to protect you, to help you navigate a world that often punishes authenticity. But it was never meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be scaffolding while you built your real identity, not the building itself. You're not depressed. You're shedding a self that was never fully yours. It's not a failure. It's initiation. The question becomes, who are you when you stop trying to be who you think you should be? Who emerges when the performance finally ends? Stage 4, the shame spiral. Then comes stage 4, the shame spiral. The guilt creeps in like fog rolling over a landscape, slow and then all at once until you can't see clearly anymore. Why can't I just be grateful? You ask yourself at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. I have so much more than most people. Why am I complaining? Why do I keep ruining things? Becomes your internal refrain. Everyone else seems to have it figured out. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? You wonder as you cancel another social engagement because the thought of making conversation feels impossible. You start believing there's something fundamentally defective about you, some crucial piece of the human experience that everyone else received, but somehow got lost in your mail. But this shame, this voice that tells you you're too much, too sensitive, too complicated, too broken, it isn't yours. It was handed to you by systems that profit from your self-doubt, by families that couldn't hold space for complexity, by a culture that demands performance over presence. Jung called this the collective shadow, the parts of human experience that society deems unacceptable, the messy emotions, the inconvenient questions, the refusal to perform happiness when you're falling apart inside, the insistence on depth in a world obsessed with surface. You've been taught to see your emotional honesty as weakness, your need for meaning as drama, your exhaustion with superficiality as antisocial behavior, your inability to function in systems that don't serve you as personal failure. But what if none of that is true? What if your sensitivity is actually a gift in a world that's become numb? What if your questions are exactly what we need in a culture of easy answers? What if your emotional depth is a form of intelligence that the world desperately needs? James, a 30-year-old consultant from Denver, shared this. I spent 2 years thinking I was having some kind of quarter-life crisis. I'd sit in client meetings talking about optimizing synergies and maximizing stakeholder value. And inside, I'd be screaming, not because the work was hard, but because it felt so empty, so disconnected from anything that mattered. He continued, the shame was the worst part. I'd think, everyone else can do this. Everyone else can find meaning in building shareholder value and networking events and performance reviews. What's wrong with me that I can't just be grateful for a good salary and health insurance? But the shame was just my conditioning talking. All the voices that taught me that my value was tied to my productivity, that questioning the system meant I was the problem. Shadow work isn't about being stronger. It's about finally being honest. The shame you feel isn't evidence of your brokenness. It's evidence of your integrity, your soul's refusal to participate in what doesn't serve life. What would you do if you knew that everything you're feeling right now is not only valid, but necessary? What would change if you trusted that your emotional responses are intelligent, even when they're inconvenient? Stage 5, the silent rebirth. Stage 5 doesn't announce itself with fanfare. No fireworks, no sudden clarity, no moment where everything makes sense and you feel transformed. Just a quiet moment where you stop pretending. Maybe it's a Tuesday morning, and you're supposed to be excited about a work presentation. But instead of forcing enthusiasm, you just don't. You show up, you do the work, but you stop performing passion you don't feel. Maybe it's saying no to drinks after work without an elaborate excuse. Not because you're antisocial, but because you need silence more than you need to be liked. Maybe it's a breath that feels like yours for the first time in months, a decision made from truth instead of fear. A moment of calm you can't explain, but don't question. This is when the self begins to return. Not the self you've constructed to navigate the world, but the self that's always been there, waiting beneath the performance, the person you were before you learned you were supposed to be someone else. It happens in small moments. You choose rest over productivity without guilt. You speak up when you normally would have stayed silent to keep the peace. You honor your need for solitude without apologizing for it. You're not becoming someone new. You're remembering someone you used to be. Before the world told you to be different, Sarah from earlier described it like this. It wasn't dramatic. I was sitting in my apartment on a Sunday morning, drinking coffee and reading a book, not because I was supposed to be improving myself or because it looked good on social media, but because I actually wanted to. And I realized I hadn't done something just because I wanted to in years. Everything had been about how it looked, how it served my goals, how it fit into the person I was trying to be. But that morning, I was just me. Reading because I liked reading. Drinking coffee because it tasted good. Existing without an agenda. Jung called this the beginning of authentic selfhood, not the ego's version of who you should be, but the soul's expression of who you actually are. And it feels quiet, like coming home to a house you'd forgotten you owned. There's a relief in it that's hard to describe. The relief of dropping a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. The relief of no longer having to remember which version of you to be yourself you're supposed to be in which situation. The relief of just being. Here's what they don't tell you about healing. It's not about fixing yourself. The shadow doesn't ruin you. It reveals where you've been performing instead of living. Carl Jung said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the entire ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." This moral effort isn't about becoming a better person. It's about becoming a real person. It asks the questions that make you uncomfortable. Can you love the part of yourself that's never been loved? Can you hold your pain without numbing it? Can you be authentic even when it disappoints people? Let me tell you about Emma. She was 27 when she started having panic attacks in grocery stores. Not because anything traumatic happened, because she suddenly couldn't pretend that buying organic vegetables was going to save her from the emptiness she felt inside. I'd stand in the produce section, she told me, holding kale and thinking, is this who I am? Someone who buys kale and posts about wellness while feeling completely hollow inside. Her panic attacks weren't symptoms of anxiety disorder. They were her soul's rebellion against a life that looked perfect but felt like a lie. The healing began when she stopped trying to fix the panic and started listening to what it was trying to tell her. Shadow work taught her that her perfectionism wasn't protecting her. It was preventing her from being human. Her depression wasn't a chemical imbalance to be medicated away. It was grief for the parts of herself she'd sacrificed to be acceptable. Her social anxiety wasn't a disorder. It was her integrity, refusing to participate in conversations that felt meaningless. If this part hits something in you, keep going. The next few minutes might feel like a mirror. Jung understood that our symptoms aren't always pathology. Sometimes they're guidance. Your anxiety might be your intuition, screaming that something in your life isn't aligned. Your depression might be your soul's way of saying it's tired of pretending. Your anger might be your boundaries finally demanding respect. The shadow contains not just what we've rejected about ourselves, but what we've rejected about life itself. The messiness, the uncertainty, the parts of human experience that don't fit into productivity culture or social media highlight reels. We've been taught to see these as problems to solve rather than truths to honor. But what if your breakdown is actually a breakthrough? What if your inability to function in systems that don't serve you isn't failure, but integrity? What if the chaos you feel isn't a sign of the wrong path, but a process of transformation that requires you to fall apart before you can come together? Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's natural ability to hold opposite truths and create something new from the tension. You can be grateful for your life and still want it to be different. You can love people and still need space from them. You can be successful and still feel unfulfilled. You can be healing and still struggle. The shadow work happens in this space between contradictions, not in the resolution of your pain, but in the acceptance of your complexity. It turns out you're not broken. You're just changing. Integration isn't loud. It's the choice to stop running. You stop trying to be understood by people who aren't trying to understand. You begin listening inwardly instead of seeking validation outwardly, and something shifts. You start honoring what hurts instead of fixing it. You start trusting your instincts instead of ignoring them. You start setting boundaries instead of building walls. The goal was never perfection. It was presence. Jung believed that individuation, becoming who you truly are, is the most important work a human being can do. Not because it makes you better than others, but because it makes you more yourself. And when you're more yourself, you stop needing other people to be different. You stop trying to change your family, your partner, your circumstances, and you start changing the only thing you can actually change: how you relate to what is. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming responsive instead of reactive. It means making choices from your center instead of your conditioning. Let me tell you about James. At 30, he was what everyone would call successful. 6-figure salary, beautiful apartment, impressive social circle, but he felt like he was suffocating. His shadow work began when he admitted something he'd never said, out loud. He wanted to be a writer, not a consultant. But writers don't make money, his family said. But you're so good at your job, his friends said. But you have responsibilities, his mind said. And all of these voices were real. The fears were valid. The practical concerns were legitimate. But so was his desire to create instead of just consume. Shadow work didn't give him easy answers. It gave him honest questions. What if I fail? What if I succeed? What if I'm happier being broke and authentic than rich and empty? What if financial security isn't worth spiritual suffocation? What if taking care of myself is the most responsible thing I can do? It took him 2 years to make the transition. 2 years of writing before work, saving money, having difficult conversations with family, and learning to tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty. He's not famous, he's not wealthy, but he's alive in a way he wasn't before. And that aliveness, Jung would say, is worth more than any external achievement. Because when you're aligned with your authentic self, you stop needing so much from the outside world. You stop needing constant validation because you're validating yourself. You stop needing perfect circumstances because you're at peace with imperfection. You stop needing other people to be different because you're becoming who you are. What would you do if you knew that failing authentically is better than succeeding inauthentically? The shadow work continues, but it gets easier. Not because the emotions go away, but because you get better at holding them. You realize that feelings are information, not instructions. You understand that thoughts are visitors, not residents. You learn that your worth isn't dependent on your productivity, your relationships, or your achievements. It's inherent. It's given. It's yours by the simple fact of being human. And when you truly believe this, not intellectually, but in your bones, everything changes. You stop trying to earn love and start accepting it. You stop trying to prove your value and start living it. You stop trying to fix yourself and start knowing yourself. You're not broken. You're just becoming whole. In a world that taught you to fragment yourself. Shadow work is brutal, yes. It's not the gentle, light-filled journey the spiritual bypass crowd promises. It's not about positive thinking your way to enlightenment or manifesting your way out of pain. But it's also liberating. Because when the mask falls away, when the false self dissolves, when the performance finally ends, what remains is someone who doesn't need to be healed, only remembered. The person you were before the world told you to be someone else. The child who knew how to rest without guilt. The human who could feel deeply without apology. The soul who trusted their instincts before learning to doubt them. The being who knew their worth was inherent, not earned. You return to yourself not as an achievement, but as a recognition. Oh, you realize one quiet morning, sitting with your coffee as sunlight streams through the window. Here I am. I never actually left. I was just hidden, buried under layers of should and supposed to and have to. But I was always here. Carl. Jung spent his life studying this return. He called it the most important journey a human being can take, not to become someone new, but to remember who you've always been beneath the conditioning, the trauma, the expectations, the fear, and in a culture that profits from your insecurity. This remembering is revolutionary. You stop buying things you don't need to impress people you don't like. You stop saying yes when you mean no, just to avoid conflict. You stop performing happiness when you're grieving. You stop pretending to be fine when you're falling apart. You stop optimizing yourself like you're a machine that needs upgrading. And paradoxically, this honesty makes you more reliable, not less. More trustworthy, not less. More lovable, not less. Because people can sense authenticity even when they can't name it, and they're starving for it. In a world of filters and facades, your willingness to be real becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. You give them permission to stop pretending too. When you stop performing perfection, others feel safe to be imperfect. When you honor your struggles instead of hiding them, others feel permission to be honest about theirs. When you choose authenticity over acceptability, you create space for others to do the same. This is shadow, work's ultimate purpose, not just personal healing, but collective healing. Not individual transformation, but cultural transformation. One person at a time, remembering that being human is enough. One person at a time, choosing truth over comfort. One person at a time, coming home to themselves. The world needs people who have done their inner work. Not because they're perfect, but because they're real. Not because they have all the answers, but because they're willing to sit with the questions. We need people who can hold space for complexity in a world obsessed with simple solutions. We need people who can feel deeply without drowning in a culture that promotes emotional numbness. Need people who can be authentic without being destructive in a society that confuses honesty with cruelty. And that is the beginning of coming home. Not just to yourself, but to a way of being human that honors the full spectrum of experience. The light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the certainty and the confusion, the success and the struggle, all of you, all of us. If this video helped you remember something about yourself, if it gave you permission to feel what you're feeling or be who you're being, take a moment to honor that. Consider liking this video and subscribing for more content on psychological depth and authentic healing. But more importantly, take what resonated and let it change how you move through the world. The shadow work continues, not as a project to complete, but as a relationship to nurture, with yourself, with your complexity, with your humanity, with the parts of you that don't fit into neat categories or inspiring quotes. And in that relationship, you find what you've been searching for all along. Not perfection, but presence. Not healing, but wholeness. Not transformation, but remembering. Not becoming someone new, but recognizing someone you've always been. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome home to your contradictions, your questions, your struggles, and your strength. Welcome home to being human in a world that forgot how to honor humanness. Welcome home